Okay, welcome along to day 2 of our session here, put on again to look at the advanced features of Microsoft 365. Now, we went over yesterday an introduction or a base setting of the package, what it is, our focus on Business Premium, and also the upsell to the E5 and the capabilities. A lot of the capabilities that we'll see will be in these advanced areas, especially around security, and that's what we'll be focusing on the majority initially here anyway, and see what else we can fit in during the time period. So continuing on where we left off yesterday, the very first important thing that you should do after you've done, the logging, the alerts that we talked about yesterday, is to make sure that your DNS records are correct. So hopefully I don't need to spend much time going into what SPF, DKIM, and DMARC is. In essence, they are a way for you to verify the validity of an email server using DNS records. They're all important. They all should be implemented, and you should look at that as something that is standard. It really is amazing the amount of people who, who basically have not set these up, and this can be the cause of many, many problems. So again, please go in, make sure you set that up for all your clients, because it really makes a huge impact as to how their emails are treated at the other end. But it also impacts the emails inside the tenant, especially when it comes to spoofing. So it's very important to have the the DMARC there, so that the source tenant also has some indication where the information is coming from. So again, I'm happy to basically take a moment and go through this, but hopefully nobody needs me to spend a lot of time here talking about the DNS records. In essence, simply go and configure all of these in your environment, look up what they are. They're all best practice and should be implemented in every single environment. Any concerns you have about DMARC, again, you'll note there that you can set that to being none or just reporting or quarantine. And again, you can grow into that setting, but you certainly should have all of those options there. So if anybody has any questions about the DNS records, now is the time to ask about them. Otherwise, go off and again, do a search and learn how to implement these. Basically, it's a once-off setting. You just set these 3 records in the DNS for the domain. And also be aware that things like SPF do have limitations. They are limited in the number of characters that can be an SPF record. So we've seen issues where people, are having issues with spam, and it turns out that their SPF record is, basically, a couple of lines long because they've added all these additional servers in there. So again, make sure that you understand the standards for each of those, what's required, the right formatting. You can use tools like MX Toolbox to verify the setting in each of those domains, but please go and set them up and make sure they are valid for your whole environment. Okay. We have a client complaining about not receiving emails from their senders, but it is the sender's SPF, DMARC, and DKIM not set up correctly. Yeah, so at the end of the day, we're all in this together. If a client or a person doesn't have an SPF record, then it's going to be really, really hard to get around that. SPF is the absolute minimum. So yeah, it is hard. And again, that's where you need to push back on those people who it's their problem. They really need to fix it. But again, if everybody conformed to using these technologies, which are simple 5-minute setup for these DNS records, we wouldn't have this problem. So yes, unfortunately, it depends on everybody cooperating together. But the thing you can do is go and do it on all your customers. And then when you're talking to prospects, one of the first things I would do is run a DNS check to see whether they've got SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. If a prospect hasn't got SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, there's a good chance that everything else is not set up properly either. So again, to me, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC show that somebody's taking care, that they're taking security seriously. So again, look at it as that way, not only a technical advantage, but also a business advantage that you can apply as well. So DKIM is pretty straightforward. You can go into the console once you set up the DNS records and turn it on in Microsoft 365. We're not going to dwell on that. DMARC, As we mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of people have not set it up. It's not very difficult to set up, and you can set it up to be reporting and quarantine only and not reject. And again, I would suggest you set that up, at least get it in place at a lower level and then ramp it up as required. So again, understanding what it is and, taking the middle ground here is probably the best approach. So I'm not going to spend time going into all the DNS records. I will assume that everybody's comfortable with setting DNS records and how that's done. The question I do have for you, however, is what about those parked domains? So if you have a customer who's registered a number of domains that they may not be using, have you set those DKIM, DMARC records for those domains as well that are probably sitting there at a domain registered doing nothing? So it's a good idea to take that opportunity and provide that as a value add service to lock those down as well so they can't be abused. So one of the important things here that we'll talk about is to remember that the Microsoft 365 solution is an integrated solution from the desktop all the way through to the cloud services. So, we're going to see the integration of, encryption. We're going to see the ability to set policies. We're going to, get a lot of power with the product, especially when we're looking at Business Premium and E5 for a number of different reasons. Now, what I wanted to share with you quickly was this article today that Microsoft put out. I'll put a link in the notes for you to go and have a look at. But basically, what it's talking about is the new, obviously, the Microsoft Defender product, but specifically in relation to this new Defender for Business. And again, you'll see that the Microsoft product is the leader of the pack here. All right, so again, reinforcing that the product is best of breed, but also reinforcing the fact that, don't forget, you get this product for free. Okay, so we're getting this product for free. I think George has turned his microphone on, so let's mute George. So again, go in, have a look at that article, have a read of it again. George, I think you're unmuting yourself regularly. There we go. Okay. So the big point here and the value add of Business Premium and E5 is this integration, and we'll see this integration story all the way through. Now, at the end of the day, one of the capabilities, the endpoint here, which is what we'll hopefully have a moment to go and have a look at, is, you can use the tools and integrate them all together to get to a point, basically, where you're getting this sort of information here. So this is, for example, my production Azure Sentinel. All right, so when this hopefully comes up, you'll see that what this is effectively the top of the tree. This is where all my signals are being drilled into. Again, it'd be nice if it came up here. Let's try it again. It is going to show you whether I need to worry about things. So here it's ingesting over 700,000 events, individual events from my devices, from my endpoints, from my mail, from everything that I've got into this environment. And then what it's doing is it's running basically all these analytic rules over that. So 228 rules it's running over that data, and it's giving me a nice summary of that. So the only thing I really need to worry about initially every morning is to have a look at this and see whether there's anything that I need to investigate. So that's the advantage of an integrated story here, is that all of those begin to feed up into these sort of tools, and you can leverage the AI, again, that Microsoft is, a leader in, to make your job so much easier rather than trying to monitor it basically event by event by event. So let us turn to the number one threat vector here being email, and we need to understand how email flows. So quickly, email comes into the environment and it is then sent through some edge blocking perimeter protection, which does IP-based blacklisting, envelope checking of the actual formatting of the email. It then runs through at least 3 AV engines. Now, Microsoft, in conjunction with partners, will share AV engines. So you are not just running, or emails are not just running through the Microsoft AV they're running through third parties as well. So all of the vendors, they work together, they share their databases, and again, make that information available to each other. Microsoft will not publicly say which vendors it uses. It does move those and change those around over time, but again, be aware that it goes through 3 independent AV engines before Microsoft release it into an inbox. Now, once it's gone through these 2 areas, which are things that Microsoft control, there's nothing there that you can really configure. It goes through what are called transport rules or mail flow rules. Now, this is where you can interact and you can say, look, I want to whitelist emails, those people we talked about before with SPF who don't have SPF records. You can set up transport rules or mail flow rules to bypass that if you want. Again, be very careful doing that, because remember, you are whitelisting stuff and it's going to go straight through. That is not best practice, but those capabilities are available to you if you want. Now, generally, you don't set any transport rules. You allow the emails to flow into the standard Exchange Online protection. And the idea here is that it will go through, SPF checking, it will go through sender ID, it will go through bulk email filtering. But an example here of what I find that a lot of people, haven't configured, which really they should, in my opinion, is down here with the international spam. I mean, most people in Australia, most businesses are not going to needing to be receiving emails in any other language except English, typically, or from any other country except for probably a dozen or so English-speaking nations. So, unfortunately, out of the box, you'll be able to accept emails from any language from any location. So again, a best practice would be is to come up with a list of standard accepted locations where email is accepted from, and then block out all the rest. And that's going to really, really help you reduce the amount of spam you're getting, because a lot of that comes from, those sort of locations. And then if it needs to be adjusted or opened up or whatever, you can do that as, again, a value add. But again, think about that by default, everything's enabled, which is not best practice. You should look at this and say, right, these are my recommended best practices. We're going to scale it down. And if we need to, we're going to open it up as required. So again, think firewall. It's all closed off unless we have exceptions and you get the customer to sign off on those exceptions, and then you implement them. But certainly start off with a base. Now, from the standard Exchange Online stuff, the next move then is into the advanced threat protection, or what's now known as Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Now, this is part of both E5 and Business Premium. This is an additional mail hygiene style service, and it has 3 items here. So it has what's known as safe links, it has safe attachments, and it also has advanced anti-phishing. Now, the idea with that is that the safe links is a reputation proxy. So any link that appears in an email when a user clicks on it will be sent through a proxy and verified that it is appropriate, it is correct, it's not malicious. And also with the attachments that are suspect, it will be sent to a sandbox, okay, and open in a VM in a Microsoft data center to see whether it changes the registry, launches ransomware, does those sort of bad things, and it will filter it out from there. And the third one, the anti-phishing, allows additional intelligence around, where's the email coming from, who sent it, what's the behavior of that environment as well. So remember that you get that with Microsoft 365 Business Premium. So the filtering will go obviously through the Microsoft capabilities, then through the Exchange Online, then through the Defender for Office 365, as it is called now. Now, just as important as inbound is outbound. Again, most people do not modify these to best practices. So an outbound email will go through multiple AV engines again on its way out to verify that, again, it's not containing anything malicious. It will then go through any transport rules that have been set up and through any spam protection as well. Now, one of the options here is that by default, all emails or any volume of emails will be allowed outside a tenant. Now, that is probably not a good thing. So I would suggest to you that you want to put in limits to restrict the total amount of emails that users can send per hour and per day. because if an attacker gets into an inbox and uses that to spam others, that's going to look really, really bad as well. So putting a limit on how many emails a user can send per hour per day is potentially going to give you an early warning if there are any issues inside that environment. So that's one of the standard things you can do as a best practice that's not there by default. Also setting up alerting. So there's no native built-in default alerting if there are issues in the outbound spam. So that is something again that you should configure as a best practice. So again, the idea here is if we go into our Microsoft 365 environment, we go into not the admin, we go into the security again. Hopefully everybody's relatively familiar with this. If we go in, let's get rid of this. If we go in here, you'll see under the policies area, once we go through the obligatory commercial, so if we go down here under policies and alerts, policies and rules, sorry. Okay, so you'll see we've got our threat policies. So let's go in and have a look at our threat policies. You'll see that we have our anti-spam and anti-malware. So these are our standard Exchange Online policies. The anti-phishing, safe attachments and safe links are generally those associated with Defender for Office 365. So if we look at our anti-spam, for example, you start off with a basic default policy. My advice is not to change that, leave that as it is, but then go in and look at creating a additional best practices policy here. So you'll see there's an inbound and an outbound. So if we look at the inbound default policy, if you want, you can go in and edit that, edit the settings in there. So let's go in here and edit the threshold. So you'll see here that you can go in and edit any of these settings. You can edit the BCL limit, the SCL limit, all of that you can configure. And you can do the same over here for your outbound. So if we go and look at the outbound issue down here, let's edit the protection settings. You'll see here that the external message limit is set to 0. That means it's unlimited. So my advice to you is have a think about, okay, how many emails does a user send per hour? On average, multiply that by 8 to 10 hours a day, double it. That's probably going to be the level you want to set at, restrictions of how many emails a user can send in a time period. And don't forget also to look at setting up the alerting capability so that you get an alert whether that basically transpires or whether there's any malware there. So remember that there are best practices around all of these, and I would encourage you to look at that documentation and set that up correctly because that does make a huge difference. Now, another policy here, which a lot of people overlook, is this connection filter policy. And there is one very important option here called turn on safe senders list, which again, most people tend to overlook. What the safe senders or the safe list does is Microsoft maintains a list of known, good, valid email servers that have DKIM, SPF, and it will whitelist those for you automatically. So it's maintaining a known appropriate whitelisting for you that you can take advantage of simply by selecting that button. And again, best practice would dictate you want to turn that on because it's going to reduce the false positives in there. But again, that's generally not done by a lot of people. Now, if we look at the anti-malware, again, similar sort of thing. There is a default policy and you can go in and add your own policies if you want. And again, there are best practice settings for this. And you can see there are many options here that you can set. Make sure they are all set to appropriate best practices. There's plenty of documentation on that. Now, if we look at the Defender for Microsoft Office 365, the safe attachments. Now, remember, there are two options here that you need to set. Firstly, you'll see when we're in a new tenant, there's no policy here. So just by adding the license doesn't enable protection. You have to go in and actually create a policy, and you should go also in here and enable the global settings. Now, one of the benefits of Defender for Office 365 is it not only protects emails, but it also protects Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint. So it's not only just an email filtering hygiene server, it also does it for your files as well. So you'll find that in the global settings. And if we go in and create a policy here, let's just create a test policy just to show you. We can target, specific users in there if we want. I've got to put one user in there, so let's go in here and put one in there. Put that one in. Next. And you'll see here we've got the option to have it off, have it monitor, again, block, replace, or dynamic delivery. Now, dynamic delivery sounds good because the user gets the email as soon as possible, but the email is held, the attachment is held back while it's being scanned. But my experience has been most users freak out because they got the email but no attachment, and they go and log a support ticket. So my advice to you is would be to replace, and that'll put a little text message in place of the attachment and say, this was a bad attachment, I've quarantined it. Or you can take the option of not even delivering to the user and simply blocking it if you want. Okay, so you'll see here we've also got a quarantine policy. So how do you want to deal with the message when it's quarantined? You're going to deliver it to junk mail locally, or you're going to hold it in the quarantine inside Office 365. And we've got a number of other options you can see. But make sure that you do go in there and set that policy for both your safe attachments and safe links. So there is no general policy out of the box. You add the license, but you're going to have to go in and add the policies and make sure you've done that to best practices. Now, the anti-phishing policy, again, you would have to go in and modify this or create a new one. You'll see here that these settings here are, a little bit more, they're not exact, if I suppose is the best word. So the idea here is to say, look, what's the action going to be? Am I going to tag things? It's going to be, where's the intelligence settings? Sorry, I went too far, this one here. So again, you'll see that you put in the emails to protect, and then you set a phishing email threshold between 1 and 4. Right. So again, what does the difference between 1 and 4 make? Well, it's very hard to put an exact item on there. So Microsoft's best practices recommendation for a strict policy would be to set this to more aggressive, number 3. And that's what I use in my environment, but you can adjust it to suit your needs there. All right, but go in and again, set the policy to best practices. Now, as mentioned yesterday, if you look up the top here, you'll see that there are templated policies for you. So if you look in the preset option here, you'll see there are 2 policies conforming to Microsoft's best practices. You'll see basically that there is what's called a standard policy and a strict policy. There's standard protection and there's also a strict protection, okay? Now, the idea is that these are the 2 best practices policies Microsoft has, and you can basically go in here and you can enable these for your environment. One of the limitations has been the fact that it didn't support customizations. You only could configure it, but it looks now by what I just saw there with that interface error. So let me just refresh this and see what it says. It looks to me as though they're now giving you that capability potentially to go in and manage those as well. So up the top there is the standard protection, and the strict protection is down here. Now, these are standard policies which will apply a best practices policy to Exchange Online, anti-spam, anti-malware, anti-phishing, safe links, and safe attachments for you. So if you want to do that, the only limitation I've found with those preset policies is you can't edit them after the fact and adjust them even further. So my advice is simply to take the settings that the preset ones give you and then create your own policy based on those. Yeah, so at the end of the day, there is documentation exactly as to what it does. Again, if you go up here and select the Learn More, you'll be able to go in here and get information on these policies, and hopefully this is the link that we want. And again, you'll see that it's pretty straightforward, the information that is available to you. My advice to you is to look at implementing your own strict policy based on Microsoft strict policy with any additional options that you do want to set. Now, once you've set your environments, I did show you yesterday, there is this configuration analyzer. So this can look at your environment and say, okay, the way you've set it up is not to best practices. So you'll see here, it's got an option here recommending that we change the BCL or the SCL from 7 to 6. I click on that, right, and you'll see here that what I can do is I'll be able to go in and apply these recommendations up the top here. All right, so if I click yes, it'll apply that recommendation for me immediately to any of the policies and adjust that and move me closer towards best practices. So think of this as a secure score style environment for your emails. You'll see here that if you want to conform to strict recommendations, which is my preferred option here, you will get the same list of things. I can go in here, select that, and then also apply that. I can also go in and view the policy in more detail if I want to, as to what it's actually going to do in there. All right. So having set all of these correctly to best practice, you could monitor it with the configuration analyzer, and you can also use preset abilities if you want. You'll notice here that I've got the DKIM, so I can go in here and configure the DKIM. I've also got advanced delivery options and quarantine policies if I want to basically go in and do that as well. So what I generally find is that the majority of email environments that I work with from outsiders are generally not configured correctly. They basically, a lot of them haven't been changed from the defaults, and they're not set up correctly. So if we look at the multi-layered approach, again, defense in depth here, you'll see that the edge protection is largely done by Microsoft. You've got domain reputation, you've got DKIM, SPF, and so on. And then down at the level where you can start making an impact is around the content filtering. The AV engines are there, the machine learning models are there, the URL reputation, and so on. Those policies, safe links, safe attachments. And don't forget that even after the email has been delivered, you've got the ability called ZAP. So that allows 0-hour auto purge. It'll look in the mailbox and purge any bad stuff it finds after the fact. And the Office clients, obviously, and SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business will also be protected as well. So there's quite an extensive layering approach, and this is the advantage of integration. Now, for those people who put some sort of email filtering in front of Microsoft 365, you are basically losing the benefits of all these capabilities here. All right, so Microsoft 365 and Exchange Online expect the email to be directly delivered to that environment, so that it can take, it can make advantage of the information that is in there. Now, a very common thing I see out there is people or other vendors claiming to have a better hit rate than Microsoft. Again, this is from a presentation that Microsoft did. And at the end of the day, and I'm happy to give you the YouTube link where you can go and look at this. This is actually from 2019, so it's a little while ago. Microsoft's made major leaps and bounds from there. So the video will explain to you their methodology and how they came to this. But what they did is they looked at the emails inside Exchange that were delivered that were malicious, even after going through third-party filtering, and they compared it to their own. And as you can see here, that when you normalize the traffic here, you'll see that Office 365, Exchange Online is far lower than any other of the providers out there. So again, if you are concerned, there is no need to put any third-party AV in front of Microsoft 365 and Exchange Online when correctly configured. So all the issues I see is simply because people haven't configured it to best practices. The best practices are in the documentation. Again, do it as a script, apply it as an automation process, and you'll get those results consistently over and over and over in time. All right, so again, I will reiterate, there is no need to look at a third-party mail hygiene service in front of Microsoft 365. It is the best in the market, and it sees more email traffic than all the other providers put together. So it, again, is able to garner all of that intelligence and apply it to its own environment. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, make sure that you go in and set those policies and look at the preset and also your configuration policies that we ran over. They've changed the interface since I did that slide, so I'll have to update that. But basically, what it's going to do is tell you when you're drifting from Microsoft's recommended best practice and allow you to make those changes. Now, this mail flow status report I showed yesterday, so this is going to allow you to see the impact of all of those policies. So you're going to get a better idea of what each policy is doing, the impact it's having, how much it's filtering out the stuff. So you'll find that in reports under mail flow status there, as we showed you yesterday. Happy to go in and show you again if you do want a refresher on that. But at the end of the day, the reporting in this environment has improved dramatically. And you can also schedule regular reports so you can get updates and intelligence on what's happening in your environment. Now, one of the other things we can do if we have Defender for Office 365 P2. So Microsoft 365 Business Premium comes with P1, which doesn't include this feature. This is an add-on that can be, added to the environment. This is a simulator. So the idea is you create a campaign and you target the users inside the tenant. You would craft an email that looks like a phishing email, and then the user would then be sent that email, and there would be reporting as to whether they clicked. If they do click on that, then you can require that users go through some sort of training to help them understand, what to look for. So all of that, again, is built in, is incorporated into the Microsoft 365 environment. Again, one of the big benefits of this integration is you can add the attack simulator and have that ability to test users and make sure that they are paying attention to those emails. And you'll see there's quite a significant range of options in there. So let me see if I can find where that is over here. Looks as though that's not the one I want. This is the one that I want. So let's go into security. Let's go into attack simulation training. So this one does have that additional option. So here is the overview, all right, and we get a nice summary. We can create simulations, as I said, so we can go in here and launch a simulation. So we basically follow through a wizard. So let's have a look at, let's do a link to malware option here. So let's select that, go next. Why not? Give it a name, description. Whoops, why that's not going to work, is it? Try that's better. And then we can select the payload. So it's approved for line of credit, a business voicemail, or like this one. I see a lot of those. So this is an example of the email that you receive. You can go in there and you can customize this. All right, so you can go in and customize this and put your own banner or the Westpac's banner in there if you want. So you do get quite a good customization capabilities. We can target all users or a specific group if you want. All right, so let's go and target all users. Go next. We can assign training for them as well, as I mentioned. So you're going to launch the simulation. If they fail the simulation, then they are required to bounce through the training that's given to them, and then you can set a due date there and follow up on and track all that. And again, you'll see here that we can also customize your own landing page. So you can customize it to say, look, yeah, very sorry you got pwned here. Don't worry, you are at the same company. You need to go through this training, blah, 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 blah. So again, this is the attack simulator. This is part of the, like I said, the Microsoft 365 Defender for Office 365 P2 plan. So that's in the E5 SKU, and that's one of the big benefits, I think, of the the E5 SKU is this attack simulator, and you do need a license for every user to take advantage of that. So if we have a think about our emails here, inbound, obviously outside of our environment, we've got our DNS records, which need to be set and managed appropriately. We've got edge protection, which Microsoft does, our network throttling, IP reputation, domain reputation, and so on. Okay, it does the AV scanning for us. And then we have the control over our connection policy, malware policy, transport rules, DLP policy, spam policy, and so on. And then likewise on outbound. So everything here in yellow is stuff that you can or are required to or should be configuring and managing. All right, so that's where the value add is provided in this environment. Is the stuff in yellow is provided with a number of default settings out of the box. So you as a security conscious provider would go in and customize the bits in yellow there to the best practices standards. Now, even besides the email that I've talked about there that I drilled into or highlighted, don't forget that even when the email gets to the data repository or opened on the device, you've got things like protection on the device thanks to Endpoint Manager. You've got the Intune properties. You've got BitLocker, Outlook. You've got the AV that's built into that. You've got the user credentials, the MFA. So again, the whole advantage here is this integrated solution. So it's not just email filtering. You should look at this as, okay, again, as the zero trust mentalities, you need to say, well, I need to assume a breach. If it gets through all of this stuff, what's going to be the impact? What else do I need to do or can I do to protect this and assume breach? And that would be, again, how do you protect the workstation from launching credentials or running scripts or doing things like that? So again, there are individual components inside the email connection or the email flow, but there is even further that you can and should be doing at the endpoint in Outlook with the data to ensure that you minimize the risk as dramatically as possible. But unfortunately, most of this stuff isn't enabled by default, or it isn't enabled as securely as it could be. So again, there's the value add that you can say, look, we've spent 6 months doing deep dives, learning, following best practice. We follow the Essential 8 or CISA or whatever. We've set these we follow these standards. We apply standards to your environment as dictated or recommended by the government or the Defence Signals Directorate. That's what differentiates us from everybody out there who's doing IT and a bit of cybersecurity on the side. All right, and there is a cost. There is an investment you need to make in being good at security, but that will give you a leg up and differentiate you from, again, everybody else out there in the environment. So I don't want to dwell too much longer on email. Are there any questions on the email stuff? I'll leave you to have a look at the best practices, to drill in there, look at the policies of it. My advice is always create your own unique policy and leave the defaults as is, so that you can always fall back to that or delete your policy or disable it if you need to. But are there any questions before we move on the email security side of things? So type them into the chat, raise your hand, give me a good to go thumbs up if you're happy for me to continue on. All right, well, I don't see any questions coming through, so let's charge on to the next component, legacy authentication. So anytime you see a prompt that has a login and a password in the same dialog box, that's using legacy auth. That's using an older protocol. And modern authentication will give you the login, the password, and then obviously MFA challenge and so on. So anything that gives you login and password together is using legacy authentication. Now, the problem with legacy authentication is that I can use applications like old world Mozilla, Firefox style mail clients, POP3, LDAP, all that sort of LDAP, IMAP and so on, to basically keep guessing or brute forcing passwords. So this is an example of one of the demo accounts I had hanging out in the wind, and you can see attempts from China to try and guess the password. So they're just banging away, trying to guess the passwords. The limitation of legacy auth is it doesn't support conditional access. It doesn't support MFA. So if you have legacy auth in your organization, even if you have enabled MFA, legacy auth is still generally on by default. So it still means people can password guess to get into your environment. So you should disable legacy auth completely inside your tenant. Now, what would be using legacy auth? Well, typically it's older versions of Office, older PowerShell modules, SharePoint Designer, but a lot of third-party connectors. So if you're using third-party backups, they could still be using legacy authentication. So that's a real big risk because you've got a static user who has standing global admin access to your environment, and also has a password that's guessable. And migration accounts are another example of this. All right. So again, go in and verify and remove basic authentication, because 99% of all these password guessing attacks is mitigated by turning off legacy auth, and you'll see most of these password brute force password attacks are coming from mail protocols like old world, SMTP, IMAP, POP, and so on. Now you can go into your Azure AD as I showed you yesterday, and you can filter the interactions you're having with your environment to see whether in fact there is any legacy auth in your environment. So the way that we did that is we went into our Azure AD, we went into our sign-ins, which is down here, and then what we did is we set a filter here, all right, for the client app. All right, we applied a filter for that, and then what we did is we went in here and selected legacy authentication. All right, so let's go in and select all the options here for legacy authentication. You'll see that there are lots and lots of them. And then if we go apply, this will tell me whether there is any legacy auth still happening in my environment. So as you'll see, there's none. So the chances of a password spray attack are pretty low. Okay, so that is, again, a best practice, but it's on by default. And Microsoft has committed to turning it off, for all tenants, probably within 12 months. But again, best practice is it's rarely used these days. Go in and turn it off inside your tenant. There's an article here that you can read about to get more information about how to do it, what it is, and why you should turn it on. And again, you'll see that the majority of accounts that were compromised back in January 2020 from Microsoft here were basically password replay attacks, which basically means they're brute forcing. Now, if you do have legacy authentication on, the thing that scares me the most is PowerShell. So what that means is I can use PowerShell to connect to a mailbox without the user knowing, and then I can run PowerShell commands against that mailbox without actually having to log into the mailbox and reducing my footprint of my logging. So in essence, the takeaway here is legacy auth, basic auth is bad. Turn it off, get rid of it, only use modern auth. And just because you've turned on MFA doesn't mean you've turned off legacy auth. So make sure you go in and do that. And probably within 12 months, Microsoft will do it for you anyway. But again, if you're focused on security, go in and disable legacy authentication as soon as you can. All right, are there any questions on legacy authentication? Everybody good to go and move on to the next item here? Give me a thumbs up, good to go, that we're happy there are no questions. Okay, all right, so let's move on. Shared mailboxes, right? So one of the things many people don't realize about shared mailboxes is that you can actually log into a shared mailbox using a web browser. Now, the reason is a shared mailbox is really just a standard user in the environment. So if you create a shared mailbox, go and have a look in your user accounts, you will see that there is a user with the name of the shared mailbox that has their sign-in actually allowed. So what that means is that if you use something like info at, then they already know the login. All they've got to do is guess the password. So if you've got legacy auth enabled, then we're going to be able to potentially guess that password. So there's no reason to allow or to have shared mailboxes logging in from the web browser. The way you access a shared mailbox is from an existing licensed mailbox. So I would open info at from my normal mailbox. Okay, there's no need for me to log into a shared mailbox directly from a web page. So again, turn that off. It just reduces the attack surface area, and I don't see that done. So many shared mailboxes are actually out there hanging in the wind and may potentially allow people to log into it. Now, the reason is because when you set up any mailbox, it's going to generally have IMAP and POP turned on by default, because Microsoft wants to make the compatibility as high as possible. So POP3 and IMAP are generally enabled by default. So again, make sure that not only do you turn off legacy auth, but go and turn off all those protocols which are really never going to be used in a modern environment. You're not going to use IMAP, you're not going to use POP. Exchange Active Sync is old world, web services is old world. A lot of this stuff can be turned off and to minimize your attack surface area, but it's still on for backwards compatibility, right? It's unfortunate, but in a modern environment, we don't need it. So again, go and turn it off. Now, the reason is if you go in and have a look at this, again, I've got a mailbox called info at, and you'll see that it's subject to an IMAP4 attack. So it's again, a brute force password guessing attack. And that attack was coming from AE, which is the United Arab Emirates. So if you have basic authentication on, you're opening yourself up to password guessing. And that is potentially, a real concern. So if we go back into here, and again, we get rid of this filter, we're running our Azure Active Logs here. But if you add in, for example, a location filter, let's go into location, you'll see here what it's going to do is it's going to, again, I can go in here, and what I can do is I can filter down to a particular city, state, province, or country. So what I can do in here is I can go in and I think, what is it, CI is China, I think. We can do a filter, on that or an IP address or whatever. So again, take a moment, go in and have a look in your environments here and do a quick look and see whether you're getting any logins from countries or locations that you don't expect. And if you are, I would suggest it's probably legacy auth that has been enabled. All right, any questions on the evil that is a legacy authentication? Any questions at all? Type them into the chat or raise your hand. Nope. All right, I'll assume we're good to go. So let me quickly cover off branding before we go and take a break. So branding, again, is going to provide a number of benefits. It's going to help the tenant distinguish what it looks like. So typically when you're phished or a user's phished, they're taken to a page that looks very much like the standard Office 365 page. So if you go in and modify it, put the company branding on it, add a custom logo, it's going to make it much harder, or it should hopefully alert the user that, hang on, this isn't my regular tenant. The second benefit is going to be around vanity. So there is more likely for users to buy in to ownership of the technology if it's branded as themselves. So a big benefit. And this is one of these premium offerings that you can offer. So you can say, we offer a premium migration service because we move your data, plus we also go in and brand your tenant. Right? How many tenants have I seen out there that aren't branded? They're just simply generic logins, right? So you should brand your own tenant. Now, when you go and brand a customer's tenant, you can brand it with their logo, their background, or you may even brand it with the information about your support services. So you may say this tenant is maintained and managed by this, here are our contact details, blah, blah, blah. Now, the way you do that, pretty straightforward, is you go into the company branding again in Azure AD and have the appropriate logos and graphics in there. Again, very, very straightforward to do that. So if we go in here into our Azure, let me see, where's my Azure AD here? Go here. Oh, hang on, it is here. There it is. So if I go into my Azure AD here and go into my company branding, and basically then what I would do is go in here and configure that. So that's where I would upload the graphic in the appropriate format and size. I will put in the banner logo, the user hint, the text, all of that I would fill in. I only need to do that once, save it, and that branding will then be applied to the login, to custom emails, to sharing requests, Intune, all of that sort of stuff. So very standard stuff I would suggest that you should be doing. And you can either do that as an add-on, so you can charge people, say, $300 to do it as a one-off cost, or you could bundle it up and provide it as a custom option. So you may choose to do it free as we're a premium provider and we do this because, that's the way we roll. Or you can say, well, if you want it done, it's $300, but if you do it before the Black Friday special, we'll give you 50% off and we'll do it for $150. So again, lots and lots of options, and it does improve security. It's not the be all and end all, but it's another little thing you can do to improve the security of the environment. So Raymond's got a question. When you turn off sign in for shared mailbox, can the user have permissions to the shared mailbox able to access it? Yes, absolutely. So as I said, the way you access a shared mailbox is through an existing mailbox. You log into the licensed mailbox first, user@domain.com, and they have permissions to open the shared mailbox and view it directly. Okay, so that's how the rights and the permissions are given. They're not given by a login using a web page, right? They're provisioned at the back end in Exchange. So it's the same as Outlook on the desktop, Outlook on the web. The way you do permissions is you do it at the mailbox level, join it from a licensed mailbox. There's no need to do a sign in at all from a shared mailbox. So that should be disabled to reduce your surface attack area. Okay, are there any other questions before we look at taking our first break? So again, type them into the chat or raise your hand. Happy to take you off mute. If we're all good and we're ready for a break, just give me a good to go, thumbs up, and we can disable the recording and we can then look at taking our 10-minute break. All right, well, let me stop the recording.